Шановні гості,
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back and we are starting the third discussion platform and change of political agenda in Ukraine. Is there more equality? And we would like to invite to this platform the moderator of this very platform, Mr. Vadim Karpyak, journalist and the ICTV TV channel. So we would like to invite Mr. Kornienko, member of the Parliament of Ukraine, and first deputy head of the Factor Servant for the People fraction, and Galina Kornienko, Sergei Rahman, the Holos chair of the fraction, Irina Konstankevich, member of the Parliament of Ukraine, the Group for the Future, Mrs. Oksana Syriad, leader of the political party Samopomich, Mr. Irina Gerashchenko, member of the Parliament of Ukraine, co-chair of the fractions European Solidarity, Peter Wagner, head of the support group for Ukraine at the European Commission, Mrs. Donna Edwards, U.S. representative for Maryland, till 2008 till 2017. Mr. Ian Woodward, resident director and the Ukraine. Well, Mr. Vadim, the stage is yours. So thank you, it was great. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is my habit to say gentlemen, and you know, that's a habit and you understand what about the gender equality in our political sphere. Traditionally, I just say gentlemen, then ladies and gentlemen. So, well, that is why I'm just trying to change this. And I think I need to change this. And I would like to read the issue of our panel discussion, change of political agenda in Ukraine. Is there more equality? So, well, we're talking about the gender equality. So, well, taking in advance, I would like to inform you that according with the discussion, you will get the possibility to ask the questions to our panelists, and in 1 hour, you will get these opportunities, and then you will ask the questions. Just please make notes and just get ready later on to ask different questions. And also, I would like our respectful panelists just to use time agenda and to be sharp and brief. And so, well, starting this discussion, I would like to start with the ladies politicians, those who are at presence here, because we do have the thesis about the changes, because human beings are not changing the habits, and they are not changing that because of correct or incorrect things, but because they are not changing because there is no reason to change, because we have to prove that they have to be different, they have to change. So, well, this is the same what's going on in our political surroundings. So, well, according with the survey from the National Political Institute, as far as I know, more than 60% of population of Ukraine for gender equality. But when we're talking about the reality, then we face the problem that traditionally women are in minority, and that's why I don't think you will say that you should not be a balance. You should be. It should be a balance. Yes, it should be a balance. And first of all, I would like to hear from the representatives of the big policy for what the reason we have to have it, because we have to understand the answer for the question, what about the balance and what are the results of this balance, for what is the reason to get it. So what's the image of the country when we'll get to the well-balanced equality. So, well, Mrs. Reid, could you just tell us the first person who just, is the leader of political party, Samopomich? So thank you for inviting me. Thank you, the organizers. So it was very interesting to listen to the previous discussion. It's a good question about the balance. So I agree, we have to have the balance. But I think we should not be so long in the explanation. Why? Because men and women, they were created for the specific reason, for the reason of balance. And I'm sure, mentioned many times, that when we have the balanced surrounding, when we have the balanced teams, we always can get the very productive and great efficiency in the activities. So the well-balanced things also could influence on stereotypes. So because human beings, they are trying to make everything in balance. How to reach this balance? So we are focusing on quotas mainly, or other instruments, let's say mechanical style. But let's think about these quotas. Do you think the quotas is enough, or it's many other things? It's not enough just to graduate the school of politicians, but you have to go through the political experience. You have to become a professional in this professional level. You have to understand, is there, the equality for women to have the equal profession as men, to have the equal salaries, to have the equal career growth. That's the kind of a precondition for us, for women, to continue the growth of political careers or other careers, etc. So, I would like to deep dive even and to continue the ideas of our previous panelists' discussion. So, is it enough to have in the family, in school, the encouragement ideas to attract the young men and to attract them to understand the equality with all the expectations? And that's a kind of a fundamental approach. The young woman, the young girl, should not be scared to be active. In case if she's hearing this, you shouldn't do this because you are a girl or you're a woman. So, of course, it's kind of a limitation of her activity. So we have to understand that quite often we accept this equality and women's opportunity and stereotypes counterparting and gender equality, we always accept as the kind of a competition between men and women. We should avoid it. And also I would like to say that very important for women to create by themselves the opportunities for other women to be active, but not to make the obstacles, but to make the opportunities, because quite often we face, by the way, with this problem, quite often the woman creates the obstacles for another woman just to develop the careers or whatever. So, the sistership is the idea of very important things, right? It's a kind of a dominating idea. Well, it's we're not talking about competitions or whatever. So, it's not like I say that the woman should, overcome everybody or whatever. So, but it should be a kind of a possibility for a woman to open the door to another woman. Thank you so much. What about you, Irina? What about the changes in this country, in our country, about this based on this balance? So, that's after the Orange Revolution and Revolution of Dignity and Revolution of Maidan. So, we also passed through the electoral revolution. And the electoral revolution also completely changed the political landscape, let's say, of this country. So, and we have the highest percent of women, 20% of members of parliament, and 20 of them are women. They are ministers, they are this. But let's say, do they have 20% among the politicians? No. Well, I'm just in the policy for a long period of time. Before, I've been the political journalist, but for the first time in my life, I did not know all the members of parliament. Even I do not know the names and last names, because, as already mentioned, Mrs. Sirid already mentioned that political person is already a professional thing. So it's a profession, and this profession demands from you a lot of skills. You have to be self-realized person. It's the specific character features, and it should be the features. And then I like what's going on. It's kind of a renewable process. I like it, and what I also do like that the way to the political activity is not so fast, and it's not because of the turbo regime or social elevators or so, but we do have a lot of young people, but unfortunately we don't have not so many real politicians. And I'm looking forward to have the real women politicians, and it would be great. But we need the ideology, the different vision. We need to have this so-called spinal cord as the background. We need to have this real character to become a real politician. So, well, I think that when we're talking about the specific characteristics, specific features, we're just not talking about the quality, but we're just talking about the main ideas to fight. It's not to increase the number of women among the political areas, but also the influence from the side of the women for the decision-making process. And the decision-making process, it's important, and pay your attention that we had 2 women in the parliament and previously, and also we didn't have enough women as the heads of different committees or whatever. So, and what we see now, we need to have more women in the context of decision-making process. It should not be done only by the men's team, especially when we're talking about the peacemaking processes. And today I've been asked about the different formats and what about the trends and the global trends. If the women continue to participate in the peacekeeping processes all over the world, so the chance to get this peace increases. And Mrs. Denisova, Lutkovska, those they're just talking about the Minsk issues, etc. So, well, and the ombudsman also are very important, and we have to enforce all these things. What about the trends and about the balance in the political areas and the other structures? I want to say that I am excited of this work we're doing with our colleagues from the different fractions. So we've done a lot just to reach the gender equality and to fight against the stereotypes. Well, women should be a kind of a great addition to the best features of the politician, to find the compromises, to find the smart approaches, etc. So we have to avoid all these things. The local authority is very important to make the breakthrough. So we don't have the mayors on the local level, I mean women mayors. So we have to deal about this. We have to think, and we have to change the stereotypes before the local election time. So if there are not changes, there will be no changes at all. So we have more than 27,000 women in our armed forces, military forces, and also we have to counterpart the stereotypes. And that's also, I think that Ukrainian women should be very serious towards the peacekeeping process. And the other things, the great trial for us is to accept the Istanbul Convention, the great challenge for us. And I think the previous parliament's mistake was that we didn't ratify the agreement because we had a lot of stereotypes, etc. So we have to counterpart the stereotypes, and we hope we will do this, and we will counterpart it. So, well, you will get this opportunity to get all the ideas from Mrs. Gerashenko. So, well, let's the more women will get, the easiest way to come closer to the peace we will have, right? Well, good afternoon, dear participants. I would like to express special thanks to organizers, Mrs. Olena, Mrs. Maria Leonova, and all that colleagues of mine of the 8th Parliament, those who created this very important forum, and for those who just kept these institutional ideas of this forum. And I'm very thankful for this opportunity to communicate for these important issues and about these issues. And just to answer your questions, I would like to talk about the events which we had in our past. In October, we had a very interesting exhibition, the Women of the Century, the name was. It was the 20th century best activists, women, those who just joined to the process of creating the Ukrainian self-identification and process, and then to the creations of the process of creating the country. So, well, governance. And there were a lot of women, but not so many. But in reality, those who created the 20th century's heroes, heroines, let's say, there are even more than what I've seen. So Ukrainian women already created the Ukrainian state. And we are very thankful for those Ukrainian women, those who, despite of the national political stagnation, religious, spiritual, social stagnations, but despite of that very facts, they become the real establishers of our state, of our country. So I'm from Volyn, from Mazhedar area of Volyn, and I want to say that in Volyn, in our region, in the 1920s, the first senator was Lesla Levchenivska, was on the first deputy, and it was in the middle of 1920s, and then this lady, she was fighting the rights for Ukrainians to have the Ukrainian schools, to have the Orthodox Ukrainian churches rights, and the language, etc. So, well, together with the Volyn's representatives, Halichina representatives, they were in the beginning of the very strongful and very influential Ukrainian movement. And 100 years after, we understand now the role of a woman in the society. So, well, it gives us the power, the forces to move on. And this is the examples of how a woman, being in a so complicated surrounding, could become the state establishing person despite of the different facts. And we will continue to hope, and I do hope that the Ukrainian woman will continue to be the establisher of this society also. And Ukrainian woman is not completely realized on a local level. So in small communities, on these small amalgamated communities, it's very hard for the person, for the woman, to take the leading positions. But we've already done a lot of activities. So 55,000 women, they joined to the local councils all over Ukraine. And this is the huge number. And Hillary Clinton said that we have to break through this transparent glass roof. And this woman and these women, they are breaking through this glass roof. And these women will be the great challenges in the system of health protection, in the system of education, etc. So, and they know for what they work and what they want to reach. Thank you so much.
Підведене, тому що справді з вами частина історії.
So I think partly the part of Ukrainian historians would agree with you, and they would say that the ancient, actually, Kievan Rus started with Princess Olga. It's actually a very serious matter that she was the first person to introduce the taxation code, and she stabilized the financial situation. After, of course, when her husband entered into the discussion with Drevlyans, but actually she is a creator for the modern state when it is united with the common taxes. And we have Ms. Donna Edwards, who is a long-term U.S. representative from Maryland. And when, for example, when we need to show some progress, we usually say, well, in America, and I think Ms. Edwards now is going to tell us what is going on in America, actually, and what about U.S., whether they managed to increase the representation of women in authorities.
Thank you very much, and dobry den. That's the extent of my Ukrainian. But it's really great to be here with you this afternoon, and also to see just so much excitement from the power of women in this room. And I like to think that there is a mini political revolution that's going on around the world. Ukraine experienced that, going from 12% to 19%. In the United States in the last year, we extended that, going from 19.4% to over 23% in the United States Congress. But 23% is not 50%, and 19% is not 50%. And so while we can celebrate, we still have an awful lot of work to do. And why is that? It's because when women are not at the table, we're on the menu. And we're tired of being on the menu. It makes a huge difference in terms of the issues that we consider. And I don't like to think about women's issues, because I believe that every issue is a woman's issue. When you're talking about the economy, women worry about putting food on the table, making sure that their homes are secure and that their retirement is secure. When it comes to national security, women are at the forefront in the sacrifice that's made when our national security interests are not part of the conversation. And so we still have an awful lot of work to do. And earlier today, we were talking about domestic violence. I worked on violence against women issues back in the 1990s when we were passing our first violence against women law, trying to get law enforcement and the courts and prosecutors and an entire system to understand that when there's violence in the home, when women are not safe in their homes, then they cannot rise to their fullest level of potential, whether that is at work or it's in their own homes and their communities. But still, 1 in 4 women in the United States experiences violence at some point in their lives. And I heard the statistics earlier today, but what does that mean? It means that women have to be part of the conversation about how to change the laws, how to improve law enforcement, and how we can end violence at home, in our workplaces, and on the streets. And that's about having women around the table to be part of that conversation. And just as I closed, I was thinking, you know, in the United States, we like to celebrate, you know, every 20 years or so, we get a Year of the Woman where we get an awful lot of women elected into office. But in our history of now, you know, approaching almost 250 years, we've had over 12,000 individuals elected into the United States Congress, and only 325 of them have been women. Only 47 have been black women out of 12,113, I think, members of Congress in our history. And so while there is cause to celebrate for all of us as women, as we accede to these positions of power, we have to remember that if we are at the table, we have to bring along someone else. Mentor a young woman, help somebody else make a decision to run for office. And for those of you who are out there, if you've ever thought for 1 minute that you should run for office, don't ask yourself again, just do it. Because if we don't run, there is no possibility of winning. And if we don't win, then we don't make the kind of change that will make a difference to all of us in our lives. Thank you.
Дякую, пані Ед.
Thank you very much, Ms. Edwards. And personally, I had like double feeling when I listened to Ms. Edwards' statements, and it is kind of sad what she said. We recognize our problems in this, but at the same time, you understand you're not alone with those problems in this world, and both Ukraine and the US, and for example, to reach the Finland level, where the majority and is run, basically, all of the political parties are run by the women, we and the US should go and move forward. I would like to go to the Ukrainian parliament, if you allow. Mr. Rakhmanov, you are the head of Holos group, and according to the statistics, as we speak about the gender balance, we just use the numbers. So 40 representatives, female representatives in this group. How do you see it is in your work? Do you feel it, this quota, which is set in the legislation, you actually implementing it? You even make more of it. Is it?
Thank you for inviting. And that's a very nice and pleasant to talk to you. And it's in reality, it's easy to speak about this because in my family, I am in minority because I'm the father of 2 daughters. I got the experience. And I was the head of the department when I was 24, of the department of journalists, and we had 24 women. And after this, to be the head of the fraction, where we have 40% of women, then it's not easy. So, well, the women in the politics has very important things, very useful. And I'm not talking about the secrets, etc. So, well, let's say it's not just a thing. I mean, that's a great trend, tendencies. It's not sexism. We're talking about a very deep process. It's the tendency. It's a very interesting thing. I mean, trend. And the women in politics, they are more decision oriented, and just the idea is even more deeper than even it looks. So, well, quotas is just very mechanical thing. So, well, we can increase the quotas. For example, let's say we were supporting and still supporting the idea for the election quotas for the politicians, women about 30%. So, well, it will be a kind of a push for the women to develop the activities. Well, we have to break through the psychological obstacles. So we have to start to change the educational system, because the strategy of the gender equality and the so-called breaking through the horizontal gender discrimination, it's very serious things. So, well, it's a problem, segregational things and so on. As for the educational thing, all those who are just going through the exams, I want to admit that more successful are women, the girls. But from another side, the privileges from the side of those who are hiring for the works, men are in majority. So, well, everything is in our heads. There's obstacles in here. So everything depends on the educators. Also, everything depends on the harmonizing processes. And in reality, the problem is not only in the idea of offering the specific positions for women, but the idea is how available, how ready the women are to take this position. So, well, it's very positive tendencies and the good hopes we face, but we have to develop these trends. And the idea is not who would like to open the door and who would be that person to offer the first, minutes of speech, but it should be the equal rights. It should be an efficacy of the human being, and the efficacy should not be determined by gender, because women, they always prove that sometimes they are more efficient in the specific issues of politics or others. Nice to say that we have 40% of our members of parliament in our fraction, and it's very good and useful, especially during the very specific discussions. It's important. We have to break through psychological stigmatizations in our country, because policy is the very specific things in our country. It's a very conservative thing in here. So, all the traditions and all the stigmas, they are changing very slowly. We have to work it out. We have to breaking through. And, women already proved that they are on the equal approach, and they are equal to men. And then the source of the public policy would be even for women, and it would be good. So we'll understand that we have 54% of women in our country. It should not be even more than the 50% in the highest positions of authority. So I want to say, and the women surrounding thinking attentively to that thesis, but my reaction is that why woman should prove something, at least. This is the phrase. Why to say this? That finally the women proved something. Why we should prove? And this is what you've said. You said that women, they just show that they are more efficient, but in reality, the success or the position or the status of men is like the usual things, and it should be like a usual things. But for women, it's a kind of like a success, and they always discussed whether she's so good or maybe how they got this, women, the positions or whatever. And we should forget the phrase that women, for example, are got it for some reason, because the women and when a woman works, lives, and she does, let's say. So we have to counterpart the stereotype. Sometimes they are walking out of our consciousness. So.
Now I would like to engage Mr. Kornienko to our conversation as the head of the biggest parliamentary group. When we spoke about quotas, I agree that quota is not the ultimate solution to the problem, but they are the necessary precondition for moving this stone up. And the story goes like this. 2015, the draft of the law was approved that 30% of the seats in the party's list should be, according to the law, it is given like very nicely away for one representation for one gender. 25, no, in new. So it was 2015, it was 30 for local elections and not 40, but 2 out of 5. 2 out of 5 should be the representatives of the same gender. Okay. Of one gender, right. But according to the legislation, it is not providing any penalties for not keeping this quota. You could have made any kind of list. The Central Election Committee can register it without taking into account this as a violation of the Electoral Code. New legislation, which is still not signed by the president, it is up for 40%, and now the parliament works on the new version of Electoral Code. Can you just give us a couple of highlights? So what is basically going on, and are there any penalties for not keeping this quota? Good afternoon, everybody. It's very pleasant to be here today. So there is no penalty for not keeping the quota, but there is an opportunity for the Central Committee not to register, to deny to register, and this one is one of the conditions to register. So this is a mechanism of denying those parties who do not keep this quota from registration. But if to expand, we have a certain issue, even in our parliamentary group, which goes as follows. So when we were forming the list We have kept plus minus to the quota demanded by the law, but then when you spoke about counties, it was very hard to keep this quota. When I've been listening, and I asked some information from the secretary of our group. We have 56 women and 20 from the majority election counties, so 20% from the list. And I would like to expand this discussion a little bit to the very interesting question. I came here as a kind of breaking between the hearing of committee for the highest corpus of the civil servants. This kind of committee elects like 150 officials for such so-called A category, the heads for the central executive bodies and their vice heads. And the situation goes like this. For 2 months I have been working in this committee. I have observed, I guess, like up to 10 women and more than 100 men at these interviews. And it is not some kind of precondition. There isn't any indication about the gender which is announced by the government and other authorities, but this is the so-called goodwill. And this goodwill doesn't work very nicely, so men are not taking part in these competitions. So we have a discussion about this with the head of our National Agency on Civil Service, Mr. Starodubtsev, and I told that at the lower ranks, we have more women as civil servants, because civil servants, like 240, 280 civil servants, most of them are women. But the higher they climb up the ladder, the less women we have. And because of the, I guess, there is no goodwill for women to participate, to be the competitors in this process. And here I would like to talk more about the competition among women, when women compete each other. And probably I am not put it very nicely into the word, but not to be afraid to compete with men at those levels where the competition is supposed to be. I think this is the essence of the politics and the procedure itself. And if we speak about civil servants, this is a contest story, but if we go back to politics, this is via some kind of, I don't know, consciential availability and what our actual political force and national authority does. And I would like in our protection to say that the Office of Presidents has 2 deputies. They are women who are actually involved in decision making, and one of them, Ms. Koval, deals with economic sector and this kind of sphere, not humanities as it used to be, but and another deputy, Ms. Kovalenko, deals with military and defense. So these are the basic points when we are setting the trends for the availability and participation of women to those spheres which are traditionally viewed as men's. As for the plans, just wrapping up, and going back to where we started, for the local elections, we are getting ready some amendments to the law on local elections for autumn 2020. So we would like to introduce the responsibility for not keeping the quotas at the local level, because in our electoral code at the national level, everything is regulated. And in Ukraine, there is a financial stimulus on the national level. It's not the primarily one, but still party Holos and European Solidarity and Samopomich in the last election, they got some bonus in terms of the funding from the state for the party. And our party, we also don't have it. We don't keep to these quotas. That's why we don't have the support for being gender responsive. So we also should think about the incentives on the local level, not about the punishments only, because there is such practice when the amendments to the law about state funding, when some things happening at local level then are taken into account when allocating the budget, and it can serve as a kind of incentive, and it works better when we have both limitation and stimulation. We are thinking about this, we are working in this direction, and I think this is a kind of legislative platform merely organizational one, our positional as a political force, and I think we're going to do a huge project in deputy training for those people who would like to enter into combat, for being the local deputy and member of local council. So to actually involve more of women and don't have we have this places actually in our political parties booked for women, because at local level I agree that this is a certain problem, because at the village councils it's kind of better, there are more women in village councils, but the more we speak about for example, Dnipro City Council or Kyiv City Council, here where the problem starts. Mr. Alexander, one more highlight about what Irina Gerashchenko was wondering about. Istanbul Convention. Unfortunately, the previous parliament didn't ratify it. Are there any chances that this one will do? Well, this is a political question. Ms. Gerashchenko, as experienced politician, knows what to put forward to the discussion. So we are not voting yet, but here I can only make a compliment to my colleague for this political kind of intuition. I believe that these sensitive questions, that they are very sensitive for some parts of society. They don't find any general support. In this room, we will have one result if we ask not about the Istanbul Convention itself, but about certain points which are communicated by some other social groups and other participating people, which can raise the question within the society. So we are reaching these topics which separate the society later than those topics which unite the society. If the women involvement in politics is a uniting topic, so we deal with it just now, at the moment. So this is to the topic of fighting stereotypes. What are we talking? But we have different stereotypes, right? Thank you for your answer. And going back to stereotypes, we see that we are breaking the situation. We've spoken about revolutionary situation like Ms. Edwards. A lot of revolutions happen around the world. In Ukraine, the revolutionary moment about the numbers for National Democratic Institute, 62% of Ukrainians would call for more balanced representation of men and women in politics. And I would ask Mr. Woodward, Resident Director of NDI Ukraine, to comment upon this. So, Mr. Yan, what are the world trends when we spoke about the revolutions which take place in gender perception of politics? What are the world tendencies around the world? Can you single out?
I'm here for a couple of reasons today. I am the director of NDI in Ukraine, and we've been working with our partners for years to support gender equality in Ukraine. Also, I am a feminist, and anyone who advocates for the social, political, and economic equality of women is also a feminist. I'd like to thank the Equal Opportunities Caucus for their years of partnership and leadership in advancing gender equality in Ukraine. Thank you very much. 2019 has been a historic year in Ukraine, and it has featured important gains for women's political participation. It's been noted by many speakers that the increase of women in parliament was substantial. That's great. It's not a job done, though. We also now have 35% of appointed ministers in Ukraine as women. This is another historic record. I'd like to highlight two of these ministers who are leaders and champions in Ukraine. Oksana Kolyada is a colonel in the Ukrainian Armed Forces and a veteran, and she has become the Minister of Veterans. It's important in the context of the war in the East that we talk about women and the roles they play, especially as leaders in the peacemaking process. Also, Alyona Babak, who is an expert in local development and a former co-chair of the Equal Opportunities Caucus, has been appointed Minister for Communities and Regional Development. Her leadership will contribute to enhancing the role of women in the decentralization process. These amazing women and their accomplishments, as well as historic gains in women's political participation, are a clear result of a decades-long effort of Ukrainians' political leaders and civil society to increase and promote women's political participation. And this is a response to the demands of Ukrainian people. You mentioned 66% of Ukrainians want to see more equal balance between men and women in politics. That's a full 2/3 of society. That is a clear and strong demand from the Ukrainian people. As I mentioned, the advancements of 2019 signal not a job done, but rather an indicator of progress along a journey towards equality. Ukrainians right now are overwhelmingly optimistic about the future, and people want and expect positive changes. Now is the time to move to the next level in our journey of equality. 3/4 of Ukrainians consider gender equality important or very important. And right now, political parties are interested in strengthening their positions through women's empowerment. There is a broad understanding that in order to represent more Ukrainians, political parties have to be representative of more Ukrainians. There's strong consensus among gender equality advocates in civil society and politics that legislative measures, and we've heard a little bit about this today, that legislative measures are needed to ensure equal participation of women and men in political life. And there's a strong commitment of the new government and parliament to keep up with the reforms aimed to promote gender equality. But there are challenges and gaps that remain. Despite the gains, gender stereotypes and biases against women are continually amplified by media and anti-gender actors. In the media, men are still prominently featured as political leaders, while coverage of women is concentrated in sections devoted to family life, fashion, and other topics traditionally associated with women. There is a lack of resources available for women aspirants and candidates to run in elections. There are attacks on politically active women. We've heard also about that today. And there is a danger that women are now being sidelined at the local level, where more resources and power have accumulated due to decentralization. Barriers also exist in the minds of women themselves. While it's not true, there are barriers related to confidence, experience, and knowledge, and biases about politics being a man's territory. So action is needed. The election code, which has been a subject of some discussion on multiple panels today, is currently under consideration by Parliament. This would include a 40% gender quota, and it is one of the legislative initiatives that would help address public demand for more equal representation. Support and training should be available to all women aspirants and candidates in order to equip them with the confidence and skills necessary to engage in political life. This enables a self-empowerment that is vital for increasing women's political participation. Public information campaigns aimed at combating gender stereotypes and biases in media and politics are needed. The role of women in all sectors, including defense and security, should be advanced, and we need to talk much more about women as heroes and leaders. And finally, government institutions, political parties, and civil society should jointly, as in the past, work on the development and implementation of gender-responsive policies. Thank you.
Дуже дякую, пане Вудвард.
Thank you, Mr. Woodward. Very structural presentation, so well. And we got some concrete recommendations what we have to be done. And so we started with quotas, so well, maybe it's too formalistic, but we need quotas. And also would like to invite Mr. Peter Wagner. That's Mr. Wagner, the question to you. What about the experience of European experience in the issue of how to attract more widely women for the political decision-making process? What do you think?
Invitation to speak here, and my notes said I should say that I'm happy to be a minority on this panel today, but with the last changes happening to this panel, I'm no longer a minority. And warning for all people who are going to organize events in Ukraine in the coming month, the new rules of our female commission presidents are we are no longer participating in male-dominated panels. We insist as of now on balanced panels. And I of course didn't check with her, but I assume that speaking at Women's Congress allows for an exception at this early stage. But it is serious. Why is it serious? And maybe allow me there to mix a little bit personal experience and statistical data and development on the EU side as a whole. 20 years ago, I participated as a fresh official, junior official, at a management meeting in my first service where I started to work. There were about 40 people in the room, managers, 2 women, none of them senior management, all of them middle management. The 2 were in charge of human resources and her colleague in charge of communication. I think this is a starting point where even me, coming from a conservative German background in environment at the German university think tank, found it pretty depressing. And things have changed. Things have changed for the better. And I come back to that in a moment. I think generally 2019 has been a pretty good year in Ukraine. You referred to the data when it comes to the development on gender issues. It has been a good development also in Europe. We have the highest number of female members of European Parliament ever, but we are also still pretty far away from 50+%. Ukraine has really done tremendous work. People are looking to the country. You're not only better than many of your fellow Eastern Partnership countries, they're even a much better performance now than in a number of EU member states when it comes to members of the European Parliament, of the national parliaments and the European parliaments. It is, however, very clear for our new president, and I still have to get used to from president-elect to president, that for her, gender issues in the whole range of what has to be done are very high on the agenda, because her experience of a woman of our generation confirms and shows why certain measures are necessary. It will, at the EU level, range from tackling the gender pay gap, it will tackle violence against women, but it will also be indeed more about women's political economic representation and participation. Mrs. von der Leyen, our president, tried to get more balanced European Commission together. She was close to it, but then member states and the European Parliament in their voting on a number of the candidates brought the balance bit into disorder, so we again have a slightly more male-dominated commission, but nobody can claim that she and many others didn't try, and at least it's also one of the most gender-balanced ones. I describe you the situation in one of the big services of European Commission 20 years ago. What is the situation now, before leaving office, parenthesis, and before still nominating then afterwards a number of men? The Juncker Commission presented their statistics, and we now have in the European Commission at all levels of management a minimum of 40% women at all manager levels. This is also true, not yet 50, but it is 40%. And the so-called management meetings, or if managers of a service unite, are significantly more democratic, more balanced, more representative. Now, these are, of course, statistics, but statistics count. You refer to it saying that it is undemocratic, but it goes much further. It is, and we're now in the context of the current days of activism against gender-based violence. There were some really frightening numbers around. Your eastern neighbor has unbelievably high numbers, but also some of the very, very big EU member states have numbers which are nearly every second day a woman is killed in domestic violence. This is a situation where, if you break it down to this, is showing a little bit we still have an issue to be addressed, not only here, where for sure the issue also of the war, or the impact of the war in the East, etc., are adding to it, but also in other parts of the European societies, we will have to add to that. There are some statistics, but I don't dare quoting them because personally I don't trust them, but my female colleagues insisted on using them. There are some analyses saying that if we continue in the EU to work on closing the gender gap at the current speed, it will take 107 years. Now that is again statistics, it's illustration, and it shows that something still has to be done. What has to be done? I said that the European Commission will, in the coming 5 years, present a number of also of legislative experiences, but let me also come back to my own manager. In the meantime, I'm a senior manager in this institution. And I've learned myself, first, it sounds banal, but you just have to always try and get the best people for the job. And then you usually get minimum 50%. But for a manager and everybody else, it is much easier if the framework conditions are there. Are there conditions that if a woman leaves for maternity leave, there is a replacement? Or do I take as a manager the risk that if a number of the women go, I am stripped of my resources? We have to learn how to encourage young men, the fathers, there's usually a father to it, also to take their responsibility. And I'm happy to see that even if they're lit in the back of the room, there are some younger men around here. You have a lot of measures which I think the Commission as an employer, but also many other European employers have taken. It's flexi time, it's all kind of social measures. Childcare provided, you need all these possibilities, and that not only until 3:30 in the afternoon, because usually most jobs nowadays last a bit longer. So a lot of this has to happen. But, and this is now a personal view, because I admit I don't know the current official line of my institution, I became with age a strict believer in quota. Because if you don't fix during a transition period a quota, we would not be now, with regard to senior management in the European Commission, where we are compared with 20 years ago. And if I look at around the table, who is sitting there now, it's a much more democratic, resilient, it's a much more representative sample of the European society than what we had 20 years ago. And this will not only make our individual institutions stronger, I'm deeply convinced, but it will also make our society stronger. But as I said, it's not always popular, notably among younger men, but the quota in a transition period is unavoidable. Now, I've also been asked to say finally a few words, probably as an explanation why I'm here. What the EU is doing here in the country to support all kinds of gender issues. We are having strong gender components in many of our programs, be it those in the East, where we are trying to intensify our presence, be it in areas like decentralization. There were references made to resources shifted there. Now we try to also accompany that by working with our EULEAD project, the EU together with a number of member states, on gender budgeting approaches, because that's one of the things where I wouldn't call myself a feminist, my wife told me not to, where I really think this is something, looking at gender budgeting, you start understanding how the gender problems work in a very specific and tangible way, and you also start understanding for other areas how you can address it. We also address it in the area, there were references made to public administration reform. It is an issue for us, but as I said, in all of our other programs as well, and we will continue, as in other reforms, to continue to support Ukraine in this. Thank you very much.
Дуже дякую, пане Вагнер.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wagner. And I would like to go back to the beginning of Mr. Wagner's speech. So you will obviously observe gender disbalance at this stage, but in any case it would occur, I think, and up to the honor of the organizers. So you shouldn't think that to blame. There should have been Svetlana Zalishuk instead of me, so it would have been another kind of gender disbalance, but she had to leave suddenly, so I am a kind of sudden change. It's a kind of force majeure. Everything was planned to be another way, to be very, very decent, and I would like to call to the special word for Rebecca Harms, the many-year deputy of the European Parliament. Ms. Harms, you are...
Dear Ukrainian ladies, dear friends from all parts of Ukraine, dear colleagues representing the newly elected Verkhovna Rada, it's quite a pleasure for me to join again the Women's Congress in Kiev today, thanks to NDI. The Americans brought me here, this time not the Europeans. But so I would like to connect to what Peter Wagner said. I'm very proud that Ursula von der Leyen is now the first female president of the European Commission. And I'm very proud that she managed to nearly achieve gender balance in the European Commission. I say this while being a competitor politically of Ursula von der Leyen, and I say this here because I, myself, after being in politics since 30 years, more than 30 years meanwhile, I'm sure, dear ladies of Ukraine, that gender equality and equal representation will not come to you as a gift by your male colleagues. You have to stand for this united across the political spectrum. And so seeing this Congress today, one of the reasons why I wanted to join is I like Ukrainian women to be united. I followed with great attention the opening speech of First Lady Olena Zelenska, and I liked very much that she appreciated the achievement of female politicians in Ukraine during the last years. It's really good to underline that we are not at point zero. But I also liked that Olena Zelenska announced next steps. And so, be it whatsoever, it should not be without ratification of Istanbul Convention. To be honest, I see the non-ratification of Istanbul Convention by government in Kiev as one of also my personal failures. I can't repeat often enough how much in the Euronest Parliamentary Assembly, also in our Parliamentary Association Committee, we tried to move this issue, but we together failed. So let's try during the next time to make this the biggest issue for Ukraine. And I think I know about what I'm talking. I know Ukraine since a long time. I know Eastern Europe and the special problems of violence. But thanks to Masha Yonova and Irina, also Natalia Veselova, I saw here in the room, and many others, I traveled very often into the territories suffering from war, Putin's war against Ukraine. And I know personally, because I met many women in those territories, how much more women are suffering because of the war. In all contexts of life, the war is increasing problems, but the war also is increasing the problems of violence. So traumatized soldiers, traumatized young men returning from the front, people living under war conditions. Recently, in my last visit in Mariupol, I met a group of women. They are going regularly to help traumatized women in these territories close to Mariupol. I know those groups exist all over Ukraine and all over the front line. And I think also for them and to honor their courageous work to help women suffering from violence as a consequence of war, also to honor them, it's really our duty to make the ratification of Istanbul Convention one of our major goals. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Rebecca. And as a person following the agenda, so we have time for your questions and answers. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's start the Q&A session. Thank you. I am Natalia Temersensa, a national consultant on the gender equality. I have two questions. The first to Mr. Kornienko. I know that the proposal proposal, one of the proposal to Mr. President was to replace the candidate with the same gender. And I'm glad that we got back this sanction for the Central Election Committee should refuse from having those who are not following the quotas. But what about the risks? Well, if we are just offering the list and then it's registration, and then the situation could appear. For example, the women candidate could avoid, etc. But at least, what is your personal opinion, and do you plan to include this issue into this election code? And the second question is, I've heard a few times today that some women, they are refusing or they are not agreed to take the specific positions. And why? It seems to me that they have the lack of desire. Maybe it should be motivation. It linked to motivation, and also it linked to the resources. I'm not talking about the money, but I'm talking about time. But unfortunately, in our society, we have the very important work, reproductive work, which is not paid, and they are done by women. And you reminded about Finland. We have the story that the part of the part of the budget of the party should be especially prepared for supporting women, those who are mothers. Thank you. Let me be brief. As for the replacement to the same gender, honestly, we've been talking with the representatives of the, about 30 representatives of the different involved into this election process organizations. And in reality, we didn't come to the conclusion what the model should be. But we've been trying, and we're still having this great desire to change the election code, but early or late, but we will make it. We will break through. So the better, the earliest, right? Yes. But there are different mechanisms of responsibility. For example, hypothetical situation, not to register. Well, it could be specific push. Do not push the women, those politicians, those who are in the list, etc. So as for the quotas, that's the quotas for expenses. It should be regulated on the level of law and the responsibility of every political force. And it should be kind of an internal barometer for you to understand what you are doing. So we have to understand that we have to spend some funds for training. So we have to coordinate with other colleagues from different other international organizations just to make the special practices just to involve the support and the recommendations. I'm talking about few the specific numbers of people, at least. So maybe we're talking about the few thousands of women, those who would like to be active in the political life. At least this is the idea for political implementation and realization. So let me say a few words about the election code. We're just talking about this, and now we have the working group, and they are working out on this issue. And we think that we have to follow the rules. If there is a veto for the specific articles, including the articles you were talking about, we have to follow the rules, and we have to, support President Zelensky, and this quota should be fixed. And as for the second question, I am proud that I belong to the team of European Solidarity, and we have 30% of our women to be represented in our parliament, and these are very influential women, those who are influencing a lot on the decision-making process. And we do have lots of projects. Among them will be very great priorities for our political forces activities. Or will be the harmonization issues, gender equality, and others. But I'm very happy that in our panel participants, we have Mr. Wagner here as well, and we've been working a lot with Mr. Wojciechowska, Kondratyuk, and well, we really are thirsty for the great educational program, for example, for the internal displaced women, just to make them the new ability to get a new profession, the different grants and funds. Well, they need to know how to apply the documents just to apply for the position, for specific positions. So well, and it should be time for them to apply. They should have time to avoid bureaucracy. Unfortunately, our European partners and American partners, despite of the fact they are helping a lot, supporting a lot, especially in the counterparting corruptions, etc. They are helping a lot, but they are not completely heard of our needs because the projects for professional revision of to get in the new professions for those temporarily displaced people, it's a great importance for the women, and I hope to work in partnership with our partners in this reason. So thank you. And it was a great issue on motivations and obstacles.
So when we entered the parliament in 2015, you remember, Evgenia Litvitska, the number of our group, she got pregnant, and I appealed to the head of the parliament, let's just, I don't know, get the facility for the breastfeeding, and you know, because she will have to give birth to a child, and you know that it's kind of hard to, when you are pregnant and after giving birth to a child, you have to be at workplace. And Volodymyr Borisovich said that he's going to do this, and he did this facility in the glass room, and it was a kind of water fish tank, and it was a kind of opening, and I came to him and said, well, are you sure that a woman would like to breastfeed in this room? And he didn't understand what's wrong with the room. Room is quite nice. This is just the illustration, and this room is still there. It is not used. Nobody uses it as it is. And for 4.5 years of working in the parliament of the previous year, we had like 5 children in our parliament from female members of parliament. We didn't have that kind of facility for breastfeeding, and this is the issue. You could try to solve this issue, probably you will succeed. And the second one, very briefly, I do agree, the problem is not in motivating. That's what I wanted to make it from the very beginning. Negative selection starts at the professional looking for a job before even the political career starts, because in the nursery school nobody decides that he or she is going to be the politician, and after just coming some way you understand this. But before this there is a negative selection, and the woman is demotivated in different ways by these rooms, by the lack of facilities, by what Peter Wagner spoke when the woman doesn't have access to career. And this is one point. And another point is that nobody actually speaks about, but I'm sorry, but the woman in high position is always the object of bullying and manipulation. And patronizing. It's a kind of tradition. For how many times I've heard, Oksana, you are a very good-looking lady, but what do you know? And imagine that Oksana says this to men. Peter, you are a very handsome man, but what can you know about this? But this is the reality, that what the woman faces, the woman passes through these obstacles, and it's also very demotivating. And this culture, this way, we should pass it. Thank you very much. Sergio, the question was to everybody, or you would just like to support the previous speakers? Well, I have so intelligent colleagues that they've mentioned almost everything. The only thing that I would like to add that every political party, regardless whether this budgeting program or economic program exists or some legislative act exists, every political party has the funds which are coming, which it should have used for the support of the corresponding programs. So these were the representatives of political parties. And any other questions, please? Okay, probably from that side. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ludmila Kolovchuk. I am an expert. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. And the question is on the legislation 2260. Please, can you expand? Okay, the expansion. There was a norm that was not given to the labor code for the civil servants. And in the part which deals with the maternity leaves and taking care of the babies. Today we saw the percentage of men who are taking the paternity leave 3%, and today we've heard the percentage of women who work in the civil servants more than 70%. Okay, so we have the picture who is going to be actually affected by this legislation. Can you tell me? And I'm not mentioning that this norm, which actually violates 2 articles of the Constitution of Ukraine, Article 22 and 24, the International Convention of the Labor Union 173, and the Directive of the European Union, which are the part of the association agreement, and so on and so forth. The question is, what are the mechanisms in terms of the parliament operation and political parties' work which could make impossible this kind of situation when fully there is no gender analysis, completely absent analysis for gender influence of the legislation which is actually effected? So this law was taken last week in the turbo regime, the first reading, the turbo regime second reading, and the opposition, you know, we don't have even a chance to make our legislation voted, but we have our noble aim, try to amend these things, and we tried to implement some amendments into this legislation. Non-declaration of the president, of the office of the president, I don't know, probably it will be the ground to make a veto procedure for the office of the president, but I think there should be a veto because of those norms that you've mentioned. Our political party didn't vote to this legislation, and like some other political parties. And what we need here, we started from this, and I tried to make it obvious from my speech, we need to treat the politician's job, or he politician, she politician, very responsively by reading the legislation and how the legislation that you implement will influence people around you, not just because you need to vote for something, you should be responsible. And I think that they should use the veto procedure for this law because of the decreasing of the social standards for civil servants and the lack of balance for civil servants by the norms of this legislation.
So, well, just a second. As a person who, one of the co-establisher of this law, I do not want to tell a lot about the so-called cleaning of the specific authority structures or whatever. So, well, the cleaning process gives us the opportunity to fire the specific bureaucrats, those who are manipulating. But the idea is that we have to be more successful in this, honest or reaching the honest level activity way. So on the top of this state service. We have to be anti-corruptive, and we have to use gender expertise. It's very interesting thought, and maybe the Committee of the European Integration this committee has specific advantages and pluses because they are specialists in this expertise issue. So I think I have no idea what is the name. That's for expertise. We have to get back the gender expertise to our government. So a lot of things were ruined, but we have to listen to our, previous leaders also. So it was not so bad previously. So, well, another question. What about this lady I promised? So, well, at least let me use the microphone and use this advantage. I am Maria Nikitina. I'm the Vyshinska Local Council deputy. Now I want to say, it's a kind of a comment, it's not the question. We're talking about the women's involvement for the politics, and we're just talking about their participation in local election. I tell you honestly, it was like hell. It was not so easy, but it was very, very hard to participate in the decision-making process. And that's because you are disabled, and this is also an obstacle. So, well, I want to ask what we can do just to make the life of women better. Doesn't matter what the way of the women to move on the hills or on the specific wheelchair. So, well, we do have the political lady with us on a wheelchair, and we do have this lady. So, well, she's also limited in her abilities because of the wheelchair. So, well, and she was talking a lot about the specific issues, but unfortunately, even the specific area, the platform for speakers was for that period of time not okay for the people, disabled people, to speak from the tribune. And thank you, they already made it better, and now the disabled people, they can speak. And now we're just, talking about the specific way for the disabled people, especially for Yana, to have the specific pandas to get to the canteen to eat. So, well, it's awful that our society was so bad towards the special people, disabled people. So, well, and the authorities should go for the best practices. And I want to also cover another political, cultural issue. So, well, in our life, this new parliament, that's.
When he gave a kind of advice to Yulia Tymoshenko not to eat desserts. Of course, no women can allow such kind of commentary, but this power, like this authority with new faces, demonstrators go back to Yanukovych times, so we should try to drop this practice altogether, because the equality starts with tradition and high political culture, and no with the bullying of women according to their age, their special needs, or the way they look. Then we are going to become the European country. Okay, I would like to hear some commentary from that part of the room, if you please. Please introduce yourself. Dear friends, I am the member of parliament of the local council from Sumy region, but I am also the woman, and we are like the women of Batьківщина, and I am former member of parliament from the Soviet Union, actually, and I have been in politics for 30 years. You know, it's very complicated, because I tried to become the member of parliament of Ukraine 4 times, but it was very, very complicated, because men, as always, they didn't count with you. and they thought that this is a woman. So I wish today we have the deputy head of political group, Mr. Korniyenko. I would like to ask you very kindly to keep to that gender quota to be introduced and taken at the level of Verkhovna Rada. And we as women, experienced and intelligent, and we have enough health, we're going to continue our fight and to do everything good for our children and grandchildren to live in a happy country. I would like to express my brief commentary, our principal position and our promise and our political force to drop the majoritarian system, because this system creates less opportunities for women to get elected to the parliament, if we speak about the national parliament. And this system, in terms of proportion, it increases this opportunity, and we stipulate it by the quotas and state funding. But as for the Verkhovna Rada, I think for the nearest 3 or 5 years, this issue will be implemented even better, and it will set the example for all of those women who at the local level would like to start the career, because it starts from the top and from the picture that the person sees on the media. If she sees like 1/3 of women in Verkhovna Rada, why don't we have it in the city council? And so on and so forth. So I think at all of the levels we're going to implement this. Thank you. My name is Bogdan Shved. I am representing PLAST, the Scout organization of Ukraine, because Ms. Rebecca spoken of this. So what are the obstacles to ratify Istanbul Convention, which was actually signed in 2011? So what are why are you asked about the obstacles? There is a discussion still going on how to do this, whether it is timely or there are more burning questions actually that exist now. Yeah, the turbo regime exists, right? Another question to the head of the ruling political party. So the question goes like this. When talking to the Vice Prime Minister, now you concentrated the gender expertise in terms of Ministry of Justice. What are we going to do with these legal acts implemented in times of Soviet Union in Ukraine, when this type of expertise was not done, and they do not include gender-sensitive questions? Whether your party would like to adopt the strategy, how to make it better, in terms of the changes, what are the terms, what are the aims, what are the ways? Thank you.
So we plan together with the public society to get to know it better, because it's a very sensitive issue, and I am sure that the civil society will find a few variant of strategies, and you will advocate them, and we will choose at least and use. So, well, good afternoon, Larisa Kobylanska, gender expert, and I have the question to you, Mr. Korniyenko. So, well, maybe it's very ironical, but it's very serious. Your fraction, you are reaching the absolutely understandable, things on different things, and that's because of training. So could you include the gender equality issue to be included into your training process? Because unfortunately, we have heard a lot of bad things from your members of fraction, so it should be trained. What about your cockroaches and your brains? What are you talking about, the stereotypes? You mean that stereotypes are like cockroaches and many other human beings' heads, but for the political people, for the political personalities, they should avoid to have all the stereotypes. And we have to be sure that we are interested in having the very well-civilized and well-trained politicians. And just to make your reputation better, it would be great to start to initiate the Swedish model regarding the protection of the victims of the sexual addicted victims from the sexual business. I think it's a good idea to support that people, especially not for the politicians, but for the society also would be great. So, well, if you are asking me as the leader of one of the committees, yes, then now a fraction will already proposed to fire the person who was so unpolite. But as for the victims of the sexual business, well, we'll observe. So, well, let me say, I would like to offer the supportive hand. Mr. Alexander belongs to the fractions members, those who are ready for dialogue, and I think it's very important to have the discussion. So let me start. A lot of new politicians came to the parliament, and some issues for them it's also rather new. And for the discussions, this type of discussions for Mr. Alexander also new. It's a kind of a new thing, new issue for him. So, but at least we have to understand what we're talking about, and all this issue should be presented not only for the turbo discussion, but for the deep dive in discussion, especially regarding Istanbul Convention. And it's not religious aspects in it, but the protection against the domestic violence. And it's also very important things. From our side, I would like to say that we are ready for productive mentorship, to have specific dialogues with the representatives of the different forces, just to find out the best way how to enforce the responsibility for the sexual abuse in the special conflict zones, and those to discuss other very important issues. But at least we have to finish the turbo regime in taking the specific laws. We have to finish with the turbo regime, and we have to be very serious. Well, I know the moderators. We have just one more questions, and that's.
So sorry, I would like to set a question.
What kinds of interventions to support women candidates do you have, like Emily List or run? Yeah, she runs. Yes. So please, can you share with us? Thank you, your experience.
Sure, thank you. I think for women running, the first thing is if you know a woman, ask a woman. And then next, make sure that she has the resources that it takes to run, whether that is money or volunteer resources and a support system. You know, most women don't have independent wealth themselves. And so the power of small donors, of individual people just putting a little bit of their money towards a candidate. One, it's somebody who will invest in you, and they will be with you every single election. They'll make phone calls, they'll talk to their neighbors and your neighbors and friends, and establish networks that will provide that kind of support. And then training. Training for people who want to work on campaigns, for women who want to work on campaigns, but also training for women candidates to encourage them to run. But if you see a woman, you know a woman, ask a woman.
Дуже дякую. Як людина телебачення.
Thank you very much. As a person from TV, I know that the time is over, so I would like to express my gratitude to everybody who participated, to the panelists, to those who've heard to our discussions, and we are waiting for the official photo, and then you are waiting for the very intense agenda. Thank you very much.
Дякуємо усім учасницям та учасникам за чудову дискусію. Шановні гості, час трішки відпочити. Оголошується перерва на каву. Наступна дискусійна платформа розпочнеться о 16-й годині. Чекаємо на вас.